Joyeux anniversaire! C'est le 14 juillet, la fête nationale française. Ce jour, en 1789, a déclenché la Révolution française par la conquête de la Bastille. La prise de la Bastille est devenue le symbole de la liberté et du combat contre l'oppression. Vive la liberté, égalité et fraternité! Pendant que je suis américain, mon cœur appartient à la France. J'ai découvert la France pendant les années 80 grâce au Tour de France. Je regardais la compétition sur la télé avec mon père, qui était cycliste, et moi aussi. Voyez les images, moi à 17 mois, à 9 ans et à 16 ans. Mon père m'a dit que si j'apprends français, j'irai en France. Ainsi, ma motivation. Donc, quelle chance! J'ai appris la langue et voilà, j'ai visité la France plus d'une demi-douzaine de fois. Et j'ai fait mes études à l'Université de Lyon comme Molière. Quel rêve! Je rends hommage aux Français aujourd'hui grâce à ma passion pour le pays, l'histoire, la culture et les gens. Alors, ceci nous amène à la baguette. La baguette est le pain le plus populaire en France. Il y a quelques origines. Une de ces origines explique que la baguette a été créée à l'époque de Napoléon. Les boulangers avaient inventé ce pain allongé pour le rendre plus facilement transportable par les soldats. D'où la baguette. According to the law of 1993 called Décret pain, traditional French baguettes baked in a boulangerie en France can only consist of 4 ingredients. Making baguettes is all about technique, a few helpful tips, and patience, all of which I will show you today. Let's look at the ingredients. Allons-y! For this recette, les 4 ingredients you'll need are lots of water, salt, yeast, and all-purpose flour, which is about 10 to 12% protein, a little more than the T55 flour used in the boulangerie en France, which is about 9 to 10% protein. There are many baguette recipes with a variety of techniques. I spent some time learning about baguette making using only the traditional 4 ingredients and playing around with different techniques. What I'm showing you today are what produced the best results for me as a home baker. This recipe, along with my techniques and tips, create a typical hard, crunchy exterior and a nice, soft, airy interior. The recipe will take 2 days. Making the dough, stretching and folding will occur on day 1. Shaping, rising, and baking will occur on day 2. The dough preparation should be done the night before the day you want to bake. Some baguette recipes use a starter called la pouliche, which means starter. It basically refers to most of the wet and dry ingredients, minus the salt mixed, and allow time to develop overnight in the fridge. The recipe I've modified does not use a pouliche, but rather the entire dough will sit in the fridge overnight to develop. Let's get the first day started. On y va! So the first step is to combine all the ingredients, all 4. So I highly recommend you using a food scale for this recipe because the hydration levels are more accurate based on weight, not cup measurements. But I will give you the cup measurements in the recipe link found in the description below the video. And as I go through the recipe, I'll tell you roughly what those cup measurements are. But your environment, your humidity or lack of is going to determine how much flour and water you use. But this is what mine is in my environment. So I've turned on my scale, and then in a very large bowl that I put on my scale, I'm going to have to tare it to 0 because we do not want the weight of the bowl to factor in the weight of our ingredients. So I'm tared at 0, and we're going to start off with 500 grams of flour. 500 grams of my all-purpose flour is roughly 4 cups. Yours might be less, but as you're working through this recipe, if you find that your dough is a little too dry, just add more water. So we have our flour here, so to that we're going to add 1 teaspoon of yeast, and then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. And before we add our wet ingredient, I want to go ahead and just whisk this up just to make sure we don't have any concentrations of salt or yeast throughout our flour mixture here. We're going to add 375 grams of water. So what you could do is weigh your water out first, or you can figure out what the weight is of the ingredients you have and then just add 375 grams of water to that. To make my life a little easier and less complex, I'm actually going to measure my water out in a separate container, and also this will tell me how much water to tell you to put in if you don't have a scale. And we're looking for 375 grams of water. That's approximately 75% hydration with our flour. And that was a cup and a half. Let's make a well in the center of our dry ingredients. It just makes it easier to mix up all of your wet. And I just used room temperature water for this because we're just going to mix it anyway. It's going to go in the refrigerator overnight, so it doesn't have to be at a certain temperature, just as long as it's not extremes. I've played around with several different traditional recipes to create one that works for me as a home baker. Most baguette recipes use between 75 and 80% hydration. This recipe is a 75% hydration to start, but we're going to add water as we stretch and fold to reach closer to that 80% hydration. I have found that to work best for me. It's a bit of a sticky dough. It's not too sticky though. I've definitely worked with wetter dough. But like I said, we're going to be adding more water as we stretch and fold. So right now, that is good enough. We're going to cover the dough in the bowl. I'm just going to let it sit and rest for 15 minutes. And then we continue with the manipulation process, which is just stretching and folding, and no kneading here. Our second step requires 3 2-minute sets of intermittent stretching and folding over the course of an hour and a half. There's no kneading here in making this bread because we want to develop those signature air pockets typically found in a baguette. So we will do this by adding more water and trapping gas in the folds. The first thing you need to do is prepare a surface on which you can add water instead of flour for the stretching and folding. I want to thank Peter Reinhardt, who is a professional chef, for his videos on using water instead of flour for kneading a wet dough. It was an eye-opening experience for me to learn this technique, and I find it very helpful when you're dealing with and manipulating a bread dough that requires more hydration than not. You need a bowl next to you in which you have water and a scraping utensil where you can manipulate, you can stretch and fold, or just use your hands. I found my hands to work very well for this. Put water on your surface. We really don't want our dough to stick. Put water on your hands. I've been dipping my hands in the water here. And then actually the dough comes out pretty easily, just like that. Okay, and since my hands are wet, notice that the dough doesn't stick. Pretty nice. Our first set of stretch and fold techniques will be for 2 minutes. I'm going to use a timer, but first I'm going to show you what that stretch and fold looks like. We're going to wet our hands well. A lot of chefs, what they'll do is they take their pastry utensil here, they'll stretch it out, stretch the dough out, and then you fold it over. So you fold over one side, and notice we don't have much of a stick going on because our utensil is wet, right? So then you go to the other side, you take the utensil, you stretch your dough out, and then you fold it over. So you're sort of making like a letter, so to speak. And we're gonna do the same for the top and the bottom. So you're gonna take your dough, you're gonna stretch it using your tool up and over. So notice that we are a little more than about the halfway mark here. Turn it around. We're gonna stretch it out and then fold it over again. Okay, notice we've no sticking. It's just a kind of a wet, gooey mess. All right, so now our seam is at the top. We need to set the timer because we don't want to overwork this dough. So I already have 2 minutes on the clock. Okay, I'm starting my 2 minutes now. All right, so that was the timer. I'm gonna stop here. I don't wanna stretch it anymore, and I don't wanna fold it anymore. So right now I've got the seam side up, and now we're gonna put the dough back into the bowl where I originally mixed everything together. I'm gonna flip the dough where the seam is side down. Now we need to let the dough rest for 45 minutes. So this is the first 45 minutes of our hour and a half. We're gonna cover the bowl and the dough. It's just fine sitting on the counter at room temperature. I'm gonna start the timer because I wanna make sure my times are accurate for this portion of the baking. And then we'll come back and we'll do another 2-minute set of stretching and folding. So see you in 45. So we're ready for our second set of 2-minute stretch and fold. So go ahead and wet your board like we did before. It's all right if you splatter water everywhere. Notice our dough has, as it's been sitting, it's actually gotten a little bit of a rise to it. In fact, you can start to see some bubbles. That's what we want, right? So we're gonna carefully remove it from the bowl. We're gonna set the timer for 2 minutes. Okay, so our dough is back in the bowl. We want to do exactly what we did the last time. We're going to cover the dough and bowl up with a towel. We're going to let it sit here and we're going to set the timer for another 45 minutes. Then we have our last 2-minute stretch and fold, and in the fridge it goes overnight. We're ready for our third and final 2-minute stretch and fold. So go ahead and uncover your bowl. Let's take a look how much that dough has risen for the last 45 minutes. It's pretty good. I can see some air bubbles too. Yeah, look at those air bubbles. Yes. Okay, last set here. We're gonna put it back into the bowl that we started in the beginning. The seam on the bottom, very hydrated at the moment. We're gonna cover it with plastic wrap and let it sit in the fridge overnight. This dough will be okay if it sits for anywhere from 12 to 20 hours. The last time I made these, mine sat in the fridge for about 20 hours and it still was produced a perfect baguette. There you are, day 1 of baguette making, check. It's gonna go in the fridge, and I will see you tomorrow. Bonjour, bienvenue à notre deuxième jour. This is our second day, so let's take a look at our risen dough. It's been in the refrigerator all night and a lot of the day. Take a closer look at those bubbles. They are really forming all over, aren't they? You know, even though we added salt to this dough, the dough still rose and developed overnight. Sometimes salt can interfere with the yeast, causing slow development, but I have not found that to be a problem with this recipe. So I think that this recipe, putting all the ingredients in the day before, it works just fine. Now we need to take the dough out of the bowl. We're done with the water, but we certainly don't want to add too much flour to this. Look at those bubbles as I'm bringing it all together. We certainly don't want to dehydrate the dough, so we don't want to add a lot. That is a crazy amount of bubbles happening there. Didn't expect that. We still need flour because we're going to do a little bit of forming and shaping. Okay, so this brings us to our third step, which is to divide and shape. We don't want to knead it all. We just want to make sure that we have enough flour on our hands that we can sort of pat this out a little bit and have enough on our board to keep it from sticking. I'm just going to try to get it into a shape where I can try to do some pretty equal divisions here. Now I'm going to use my scale for this. So we're going to divide this baguette dough to 3 portions, and they're each going to be 300 grams. So I'm using my scale for that. Now a traditional baguette is 350 grams, but I don't have a big enough pan or big enough oven, like a commercial oven, to do those long 22-inch baguettes that are traditional. So I'm just going to do a quick little eyeball this and try to divide it into thirds, and I'm probably going to have to add dough to it. Okay, so I'm just going to cut these down a little bit until I get what I know should be 300 grams. So I'm just going to weigh it, try to get as close as I can to 300 gram, and then try to even them out as much as I can. Okay, all 3 of these are almost at 300 grams. We need to shape them into rectangles. Again, we don't want to manipulate them too much. I'm going to flour a nice little space at the top of my board where I can let them sit, because they're going to rest for like an hour once we form these. What we do is we take the dough round. This is the technique. You're going to just punch it out just a little bit, push out when you get with those big bubbles, like that's a really big bubble. We should just pop it. But if you have an odd side, it's okay, because when we fold it, you can fold it in a little bit more on that side. All right, and then you're going to form this like a letter, and we're going to do this on all 4 sides. So you're going to take one side of your dough. You could use your bench scraper if you want to lift it off of the board, and you're not stretching anything here. It's just basically lifting and folding. Again, this helps create those air pockets that we want to see in that finished product of our dough, of our baguette. Okay, so it's not big folds, but pretty simple folds. And then you take, so it's 2 sides in, and then you're going to take the top, fold it over. Okay, and you're going to take the bottom, use that bench scraper if you need it, and then fold it over so that you have a seam pretty much in the middle. Okay, it's a small rectangle, but it is a rectangle. And so as you can see, that's what it's going to look like. So we're going to flip it over and put it on our board that we have floured. Okay, and we're going to do the same with the other 2. right, so all we have left to do now is just cover our baguettes here, the dough, with a towel. You could use plastic wrap if you want. We're gonna let these rest for 45 minutes to an hour. Before we continue with the next step, we need to prepare our oven. Yes, it's not just preheating it. The oven prep is what will give you that signature crunchy exterior. So in order to do that, in your oven, you want to place the bottom rack on the lowest level, and then you want the top rack about the upper half position of your oven. You're gonna place the pan that you're gonna bake the baguettes in the oven. You're gonna take a skillet or any pan that you have. You're going to fill it with water. You're just going to place it on the bottom rack of your oven. All right, and then you're gonna preheat your oven to 500 degrees. The high heat and skillet with water will create the steam needed for the crunchy exterior. So now we're on to our fourth step, which is making the final baguette shapes that you expect. Okay, let's take a look at our rectangle shaped baguettes. We're going to make that signature long rope shape. I'm gonna show you a quick little trick. If you're afraid of getting too much flour in concentrated places on your board, you could get like a little sifter and then sift slightly the flour so it's more dispersed. So I'm gonna take one rectangle dough and I'm gonna move the others a little out of the way. Oh, they stuck, didn't they? Still got some bubbles forming in my rectangle dough here. We're going to just slightly pat it out. Again, we just kind of want to get rid of some of the big bubbles. This is a very, very light and airy dough. All right, fold one end. I'm using the end that's farther away from me because it's easier to fold towards me. I'm just gonna roll it over. I'm gonna take my fingertips and I'm just going to press the edge down so that it keeps the dough nice and tight. Flip it over one more time to almost the end. All right, so I'm gonna turn around so that you can see it. Again, using my fingers to kind of tighten that seam down. And now, I'm gonna take the edge of my hand and I'm gonna find the middle point of all of this, which is gonna be about right here. So I'm just gonna make sort of a little line there, and that's my visual fold line. So then from there, I'm just gonna take it and fold it over. So now it's a nice roll. Then take the palm of your hand and then you're going to make a seam where those two, the top and the bottom dough meet, okay? And this just keeps it from breaking apart. You can hear those bubbles popping as I'm creasing these edges here. So that's the first part of this. So now we're gonna take our hands, we're gonna start in the center and we're just gonna roll the dough out, okay? Because we want to make this about 15 to 17 inches in length. Now, if you are making the baguette doughs with 350 grams and you have a big enough pan and oven for them to cook in, then you want your baguettes to be like 22 inches. We don't want a very sharp pointy end, but a traditional baguette end would be a little bit tapered. So to get that tapered, you're gonna cup your hands and they're just gonna, as you roll the ends, just kind of press down to give a little bit more friction to those ends as you're rolling it. So I've got a little bit of a taper, but not too much. All right, and we're gonna do this for the other two. So for right now, I'm just gonna push this one aside and we're gonna work the other two baguettes. So traditionally, a boulanger will place each baguette on a lightly floured couche. A couche is French for just stretched out or lying. And that is what our dough is going to be doing. It's going to be resting and stretching out, right? But if you don't have a couche, which you can buy on Amazon, you can use a clean kitchen towel like me. You're going to take a cookie sheet and flip it upside down. You want to take a clean kitchen towel. You're going to lay the towel down, bunch it up a little bit, leave space on the side to put your baguette. Again, just make sure it's floured really well. All right, so I'm going to place my baguette on my divided space here. Okay, then you want to bunch up the towel so that you're creating a definite divider between each of the baguette rolls. We're gonna put these seams side up because we're gonna flip them when we put them back onto the pan. When we do that, we want the seam on the bottom when we put them in that final position. Okay, so then we're gonna bunch up the towel next to that one. And then we're gonna place our last roll over here, seam side up. Take a look at my homemade couche. So we're gonna let them sit like this. We're gonna cover them up with a towel and let them sit for another hour. So the baguettes are ready when you can press the dough and most of the indentation will bounce back. Ideally, we don't want to touch the baguettes very much because we neither want to deflate them nor leave unwanted marks and bends all over the dough. So to do that, we're going to transfer them carefully. So if you have a pizza peel, you can do that. If not, you can do my little creative technique here. But whatever will work for you in order to touch them the least amount of time is ideally what you want. It's been an hour and they've definitely puffed up. It's good to go. We're ready for the next step, which is to transfer them over to parchment paper. I have another cookie sheet. So I've got the big one in the oven, which is an 18 by 13 in the oven. And then I've got two smaller ones that are the same size here. So I'm gonna turn another one upside down and I'm gonna put a piece of parchment paper over it. And this is the parchment paper we're gonna put in the oven on the other cookie sheet. But we have to transfer the dough in a quick way without touching it very much, if at all. We're going to carefully roll the couche, the homemade couche here with the kitchen towel, and we're going to flip it, the dough, over onto the parchment paper like so. You can scoot it over just a little bit if you have to, just to make sure it fits onto the parchment paper okay. All right, so that's when it's flipped. So now the seam side is down because remember we put the seam side up when we put it onto the couche the first time. All right, so now I'm gonna rotate my cookie sheet around, which is why I like to use cookie sheets because you can move them easily. So we're gonna do the same thing. If you feel you have too much flour on your baguettes, then you can just take a pastry brush off a little bit of that flour. But now we want to score them. So you need something sharp, whether it's a razor blade or a sharp knife. And we're going to score them 3 times, 3 slits down at an angle and about 1/4 of an inch deep. And you just do a quick, swift motion. Okay, that's one of them. And this gives that signature. It's an intentional slash that will cause the baguettes, as they rise and expand, they will expand in the areas that we want them to expand, which will be where we slit them, right? And I'm just going to sprinkle flour over the tops, but we have that pretty floured look that you can get at the boulangerie. Now let's do the tricky part of transferring them to the baking sheet that's in the oven. Our 6th and final step is to bake. In order to do that, now that our oven is preheated to 500 degrees, we're going to carefully step aside so you don't get any steam in your face. We're going to take out the baking sheet, close the oven. Then we're going to move our cookie sheet with baguettes on them. We're just going to touch the parchment. We're not going to touch the cookie sheet that's super hot. And we're just going to slide the baguettes over onto the hot pan. Just carefully make sure that your baguette are separated because we don't want them to touch. We want to make sure that the baguettes can brown evenly all around, so we don't want them touching each other. I think that center baguette is going to be my prettiest one. That's what it looks like. It's perfect. It's ready to go in the oven. So the oven is still set at 500 degrees. It's hot. It's ready to bake these baguettes. So we're going to put quickly, I still have water in my skillet. If I didn't, I need to put more water in it, but the water is still there. That's what's going to create the steam. We're going to decrease the temperature to 475 degrees, and we're going to bake for 15 minutes. And then we're going to drop the temperature and bake for another 15 to 20 minutes, and then our baguettes will be done. Our first 15 minutes of baking are up, so we're going to open up the oven, moving aside not to burn ourselves. We're going to move the skillet with water in it. Still has water in it, which is awesome, and it's heavy. All right, and we get our first peek of the baguettes. So because we got to rotate the pan, oh, they look like store-bought baguettes. They look gorgeous. Here's your first glance at them. Beautiful, right? So we're going to drop the temperature to 450 degrees, and we're going to bake for another 15 minutes, maybe 20 if they're not brown enough, and then they'll be done. We just want to make sure they're golden brown when we take them out. The baguettes are ready. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, they're beautiful. We're gonna let them cool for about 20 minutes and then we'll break into them. Take a look at our gorgeous baguettes. Let's see if they crunch and there's area on the inside, as I hope they are. Let's test one of these and see if we have that authentic baguette crunch. Okay, you can hear it, sounds good. Okay, let's cut into one of these. See if we get that airy, those airy pockets. Oh yeah, that looks like an authentic baguette. That's exactly what we were looking for. Oh, you hear that crunch? Nice. All right, nice and soft interior. Let's tear it. Oh yeah, look at that nice gluten stretch. Perfect. Oh, that's the baguette I've been waiting for. So the real test though is when you can tear into the baguette and you hear that crunch and it flattens into squishy because it's soft on the inside, and then you can just tear it open and you've got that nice glutinous stretch. Oh, reminds me of France. You can still hear the crunch, you can see the gluten stretch and the crumb. Yes, authentic French baguettes achieved. I know you want to know how these taste, so let's get Scott in here to do the honors. Bonjour.
Hello.
Bienvenue chez Summer. So I'm really excited for you to taste these French baguettes today and tell us what you think. There really isn't much for me to explain to you because you've eaten lots of baguettes over the years. So there are only really 4 ingredients: flour, salt, water, and yeast. This is about as simple as you can get. Give it a taste. Can you hear that crunch? All the baguettes you've eaten over the years. How does this compare? What are your thoughts on this one?
It's as good as any baguette that I've ever had. Nice hard exterior, but very soft in the middle, and very airy. It's not a dense bread at all. Yeah, this is great. I mean, as good as any baguette that we had when we were in France.
All right, you heard it from the honest person here. That says a lot. You saw what it looks like, he's told you what it tastes like, and he's had a lot of baguettes from in France and in the United States. Talking about baguettes and our experiences of being in France, what are some of your favorite items you like to eat with a baguette?
Well, something we don't eat as much in the United States is escargot. This would be great for escargot and soaking up all the butter that's with the escargot. Also a French mild cheese. I don't really like the stinky cheeses, but mild French cheeses would be good too.
Yes, that's we tend to gravitate towards the cheese here. And in the past, I've found escargot at the store and cooked it at home, and it just wasn't the same. In France, it's pretty incredible. You can find frozen, prepared escargot ready to go. Tastes fresh once you bake it. Sop up the garlic juices with your bread. Oh, it is definitely heavenly. So is this a win?
Yeah, this one's a good one.
Yes. Merci d'avoir regardé. I absolutely loved preparing for this video and reflecting on my many trips to France. I can't wait to share more French baking videos with you in the future. Subscribe to my channel, click on the notifications bell button to know when I upload new videos, and share my videos with your family and friends. This video today, for me, is my love letter to France. Bonne fête nationale. L'Hexagone, je vous aimerai toujours. Jusqu'à la prochaine fois, allez faire cuire le monde. Au revoir.